Okay, Boxing Fanatics, welcome to episode 44 of the podcast. So, Brandon Figueroa stops Nick Ball last night in the 12th round at Echo Arena, Liverpool, to capture the WBA featherweight title and become a free-weight world champion. Let's talk about it. So firstly, it's fair to say this is, I guess, a little bit of an upset in some ways. Obviously, we know the credentials of Brandon Figueroa. As I've said, formerly a two-weight world champion. Beat some big names. I guess Lewis Neary had a couple of good battles with Stephen Fulton. Definitely an elite fighter. But Nick Ball, it's fair to say, has been is quite dominant in I guess recent years. Obviously, he had that draw against Ray Vargas. But apart from that, he obviously had a very close fight against Ray Ford, which I think is going to age very well. So going into this fight was very intriguing. It was a very intriguing matchup, and it's fair to say this fight delivered in terms of entertainment value and in terms of quality. I thought it was a very high-level fight. I thought it was a very, very good fight, a very nip-and-tuck affair. But ultimately, I guess with the final round to go, Brandon Figueroa finds that that magical left hand to put Ball down pretty heavily. It was a beautifully timed shot. Ball, to be honest, done really well just to get up. He fell flat on his front, and I think he got up at 8 or 9. It was a brilliant shot, basically. It was a brilliant shot. And then Figueroa, obviously noticing that Ball was hurt, basically jumped on him, done the flurries, and a good stoppage by the referee, and the Ball was just not going to recover with the amount of time left in the round. So I'm looking at the scorecards here, and so at the time of the stoppage, Figueroa was actually up on 2 rounds. So I'm not sure how the knockdowns affected that. I don't know if prior to that round, if Ball was winning prior to the 2 knockdowns, perhaps. But ultimately, with the 2 knockdowns, Figueroa looks like he was gonna get the decision, regardless if he got the stoppage or not, following the 2 knockdowns. So yeah, Brandon Figueroa pulls out of the hat and becomes a free-weight world champion. Very impressive. And if we just talk about the fight, Nick Ball's got a very come forward, all action style. And to be honest, sometimes it's actually a little bit difficult to score because he comes forward so much. He throws a lot of punches, as does Figueroa, and it was just very nip and tuck sometimes. And sometimes you have to really look at. It's one of those fights where you have to look at who's landing actually the better shots here, who's landing the better punches, who's landing the more eye-catching shots. And I think that's ultimately what it's about when it comes to scoring fights. Volume. I think there is such a thing as junk volume in boxing, where just because someone's coming forward and throwing lots of punches, if it's all just arm punches and they're not really causing any damage, then I think judges are right sometimes to kind of not dismiss it, but maybe not give it the credence, sometimes, because it's not causing any damage. But this fight was very nip and tuck, and yeah, they both landed some good shots throughout the 12 rounds. What I found interesting about this fight is that Ball was actually pushed back quite a lot, which I think is a bit strange because obviously Ball is 5'2", and he obviously has to come forward. He's got, pretty much against everyone, he's got a reach disadvantage, a height disadvantage. Brandon Figueroa at 5'9" is massive for this weight, to be honest. 5'9" to be weighing in 125 pounds is, it's incredible, to be honest. It's incredible, we have fighters at welterweight and middleweight who are 5'9", and obviously you've got people like Canelo who are like even 5'8", 5'7", and are fighting at super middleweight. So point is, Brandon Figueroa is big for this weight for sure. Even though he's essentially come up 2 weight divisions. He used to be on the weight divisions below. He's still big for the weight, basically, because of his height. So that was interesting. I found it was interesting how Ball was pushed back quite a lot. Couldn't quite dominate Figueroa like previous opponents. Figueroa showing, I guess, a good chin at points. I think in the 3rd round, Nick Ball landing a nice uppercut, and Figueroa took it well. Never really seemed hurt there were moments where he maybe got stung, but he never seemed close to coming down. So Figueroa is showing a lot of class really in this fight. Showing a lot of class, and Ball. I mean, it was close. It was close. I mean, honestly, from my perspective, looking at this fight before the last round, I think it really was touch and go. I think it could have gone either way, to be honest, because I think it's, as the old saying goes, you have to rip the title from the champion, and I'm not sure, if it, by the end of the 11th round, Figueroa had really, in my opinion, I think it was quite nip and tuck. I'm not sure, if he'd really kind of dominated to the extent where to get a decision on the cards, basically, because the champion always has the benefit of the doubt, especially in his hometown. The champion has the benefit of the doubt. So if you're going to beat the champion on points, you have to win, in dominant fashion. And I think it was very nip and tuck. But after the two knockdowns, and obviously he got the stoppage anyway. But after the two knockdowns, he definitely deserved to win, Brandon Figueroa. Like I said previously, whether the referee gave the stoppage or not, he deserved to win, and he did win. Obviously, in boxing, we can never have a fight without any controversy. So after the ball was stopped, Figueroa's team, jumped in the ring. Obviously, filled with happiness, filled with pride. Jumping all over the ring, but obviously, ball was still hurt. It was pretty hurt, and we saw, I don't know, I guess a little bit of a scuffle, a little bit of an altercation in the ring. Not being happy with the celebration when Ball was still hurt, which is understandable, but you can also obviously understand Figueroa's side as well, who's just won a world title on away soil. So we have to understand both sides. Generally speaking, we have seen that before when someone's been knocked. I mean, from what I remember, Nick Ball wasn't knocked out cold, but yeah, he was very hurt. And, it's obviously good sportsmanship to not over-celebrate when you've knocked out your opponent, especially when he's really hurt. Make sure he's okay first. But, look, emotions running high. It's obviously, a massive fight and a massive win for Figueroa and his team. So, like I said, can understand both sides. And, thankfully, it didn't seem to escalate that much. But look, both fighters deserve enormous credit for being on, a great fight. So, I mean, overall, what went wrong for Ball here? Because I think I've touched on it previously. He was pushed back quite a lot, which I think, is not Ball's style. I'm not sure how good Ball is fighting backwards, to be honest. I feel like he's at his best, Ball, when he's on his front like a little terrier, and he's on your chest, and he's kind of just swarming you with punches, and he's like a terrier, basically, like a little terrier. That's when I think Ball is at his best. When he's on his back foot, I don't think he's as good of a fighter. And like I've said, I think Figueroa put him on his back foot more than he probably wanted, and I think that was a problem for Ball. He couldn't, I guess, come forward to the same extent. Obviously, he had his moments where he was coming forward and stuff, but not the same as usual. Not the same as usual. And the thing with Ball as well, 5'2", we have to understand that he's going to be a lot shorter, and parts of this fight reminded me a little bit of the Ray Vargas fight, a little bit, where, in that fight, the first half of the fight, Ball couldn't really get close to Ray Vargas. It was, it was a struggle for him. He couldn't get close. Ray Vargas was just dominating the action just from the outside, really. Ray Vargas, obviously 5'10", is even taller than Figueroa. I have no idea how these guys make featherweight. I mean, that's a story for another day, I guess. But there was elements of that, and I don't think it helped as well that Brandon Figueroa is a bit of a switch hitter, a bit tricky, and quite skillful in there sometimes. Definitely Figueroa, quite skillful. A nice left hand sometimes, some good counter punching, and I guess you could say Ball was a little bit outboxed at points. He was outboxed by, I guess, the taller man, the sharper man at points, but Ball obviously had success. Like I said, it was very nip and tuck. So, I mean, for Ball, I feel like, he had to just try to put Figueroa on the back foot more, and he couldn't quite do that. And I think that's I think ultimately his undoing in this fight. So Ball obviously suffers the first loss of his professional career. Obviously he's had close fights before. The Ray Vargas fight, it was a draw, could have gone either way. The Ray Ford fight, some people think Ray Ford deserved to win that. So he's come close a couple of times. like I said, he's got that style, where unless he's really dominating, he's very high entertainment ball. He's always kind of involved in, kind of a scrap. So sometimes it's difficult to actually, score his fights against when he's facing someone of a similar level. So, yeah, but Bull suffers the first loss of his professional career now, 23-1-1, and I don't know, my thoughts here after this fight, when a fighter suffers a stoppage, I feel like, there is a potential for a bit of decline there, to be fair, because, it's like that punch resistance. I think, when a fighter gets stopped for the first time, I think it does chip away at their punch resistance a little bit. Bull's style definitely relies on having a good chin. There's no doubt about it. He's in the firing line a lot. Bull's not going to... It's not a style. He's not going to be on the back foot, evading punches, really. He's kind of coming forward. He's kind of like got that little shell. But he's always getting hit, really. He's always getting hit. So his punch resistance is always being kind of chipped away at. And I think it's fair to assume that, his punch resistance might take a little bit of a hit after this fight. I mean, it remains to be seen. He might come back and, he still have a good chin and stuff. But that was a heavy knockout. And, we've seen it with fighters before. Once their kind of chin has been cracked once, their punch resistance starts to decrease a little bit. So I think that's going to be very, very interesting if Bull's going to kind of be the same fighter again after this one. Because it was a heavy knockout. And yeah, I mean, he got stopped quite brutally there, So that's going to be interesting. That's going to be very interesting. I mean, Figueroa, on the other hand, apparently has never been down, which is, I guess, even more impressive. Despite his loss, he's never actually been down. So someone with even better chin than Bull. So it remains to be seen. A couple interviews suggested that there could be a rematch. I saw one of Manny Robles, Figueroa's trainer, saying that, obviously, look, they gave us the opportunity. It was only right we give the opportunity back. And I think commercially after that fight, that probably does make sense. It was a very good fight. It was very entertaining. So commercially, I think that is definitely viable. In the UK, I think it would do well because, people have seen Figueroa what he's about. It was a good fight, So I think that is possible. But is Bull and his team going to want the rematch after that? To be honest, because like I said, it was a tough fight and a heavy knockout. Are they going to want to jump straight in against Figueroa? Because it's okay. It's arguable. Maybe we're on our way to a points win before the last round. Maybe I saw Figueroa in one interview saying that Bull got a bit greedy. It's plausible. If Bull maybe played it safe in the 12th round, could he have edged out? A split decision win on the cards, being the home fighter? Possibly, to be honest. But I think Bull and his team know that if they get into another fight with Figueroa, then it's gonna be a tough night, and there's always gonna be that fear on Bull's side that he can knock me out. Once someone's knocked you out once, they can do it again. So it's gonna be very, very interesting if they actually take a rematch. Figueroa, obviously, I'm not sure if there's a rematch clause or not, but obviously there's some big fights on the horizon for him now. So obviously you have other champions at the weight. You obviously Bruce Carrington, Angelo Leo, and then also we have Rafael Espinoza as well. So, quite an open division. I guess no one's the man, so to speak, at the division at featherweight at the moment. So it's kind of that Ring Magazine title is vacant. So, a unification fight, would make sense, I guess, for Figueroa. I don't know, commercially, though, I don't know what... Commercially, the Bull fight might be more lucrative for him, to be honest. But if we're talking about, I guess, I don't know, legacy-wise, whatever, there are opportunities, basically, in unifications, and there's a few different options. Like I said, Bruce Carrington, Rafael Espinoza, Angelo Leo, all possible fights for Figueroa if he doesn't take the Bull fight. And interestingly, before this fight actually took place, the Bull was obviously being built up for a fight against Naoya Inoue. So obviously Inoue fighting at super bantamweight. So Inoue obviously in a weight below, but I think I think a lot of people would be surprised if Inoue doesn't go up to featherweight before he ends his career. Inoue seems to be handling himself fine at super bantamweight, so I think it's a matter of time before he goes up. And I think the Ball fight, he would have fancied the Ball fight. I think the Figueroa fight is a bit more different for Inoue, to be honest. I mean, obviously Inoue has just beaten someone I believe of similar dimensions to Figueroa. If I just double check, yeah. So David Picasso, which was David Picasso, 5'8". Okay, not as tall as Figueroa, but still not a small guy. Obviously, Inoue is only 5'5". So look, Inoue's getting that practice. But again, at featherweight, the fighters get even bigger. They get even bigger. Featherweight, as we're seeing at featherweight, you've got people 5'9" and 5'10", right, fighting at featherweight, which is just ridiculous, to be honest. You can't imagine these guys walking around, at this weight. They must be walking around at least, like, I don't know, 140 or 150 pounds. I don't think that's, out of the question. Maybe even more, because they're tall guys for the weight. So, in a way, I mean, based on that fight, I don't think either man would have a chance against Inoue. I think I would back Inoue against either man at featherweight, to be honest. I think Ball, the problem with Ball is that he's just a little bit too hittable against Inoue. And I think Inoue, his power is kind of doesn't. I mean, okay, to be honest, it doesn't seem like he's as powerful as he was at the lower weights in a way, but he's still got enough pop in there to keep you honest. And I just think, Ball against Inoue, based on that performance, just too hittable. And I think Inoue would just tee off on him. It'd be a great fight, very entertaining, but I think Inoue would just have the boxing skills over him. Inoue against Figueroa is a bit more interesting, I think, especially after that. But we have to remember, I mean, obviously, boxing is obviously chess, not checkers, but Inoue done a job on Stephen Fulton, who, beat Brandon Figueroa on 2 different occasions. Obviously, styles make fights, but, does that tell a story? I guess that remains to be seen. Because Inoue had no issue against Stephen Fulton whatsoever, whereas Figueroa has lost to him twice. So that remains to be seen. But again, look, Figueroa would pose something very different to Inoue. Again, it'd be a very different fight. It'd be someone who again has the height on him, who's a lot taller, switch hitter, probably just bigger overall than Inoue is used to. I mean, featherweight is going to be very interesting if Inoue does move up, which I think most of us boxing fans are hoping he does move up, because it feels like he needs to in order to really have a challenge. I mean, we're seeing Inoue be a bit more look a little bit more mortal at super bantamweight. And then I think featherweight is probably the ceiling for Inoue. It's probably the ceiling, and that'll be the last step. And I think that's the weight where we're going to see, where he's really going to be pushed. But so that's an interesting fight. But it's obviously all speculation, But the point is, Figueroa has got a lot of options now. A lot of options coming from a very impressive victory. So yeah, let me know, guys, what you think about this fight. Those are kind of my thoughts on this one. Credit to both men. I thought it was a very entertaining fight. Exactly what world title fight should be. Both men came to fight. Both men, neither stunk the place out. They threw bombs in the middle of the ring. In the end, no controversy. I mean, obviously the celebration a little bit, but it was a conclusive win, which is, again, sometimes we don't see in these world title fights. It's always marred with subjectivity and all that. But because it was a stoppage in the end, Ball can't have any complaints, because he was stopped in the end. So yeah, an interesting fight. I mean, who would you like to see even man fight again? I mean, should Ball bounce back against someone with lesser opposition, before he jumps back in with Figueroa? Could we say the writing was on the wall for Ball? He has had some tough fights, and in fairness to Ball, he has fought some elite fighters already in his fairly young career. He's only 25 fights in. I mean, he has fought some good opposition already, and sometimes that happens in boxing, when you consistently take on good fighters, at some point you're going to come unstuck. And I think that's ultimately what happened against Figueroa last night. And Figueroa, well, look, he's had a great career, and this is another massive accomplishment. I'm really interested to see who he's going to fight next. So those are my thoughts, guys. Thanks for listening. As always, if you like this episode of the podcast, please like, comment, subscribe. And yeah, I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.